The first thing I saw that morning wasn't the snow. It was the flashing red and blue lights outside my window. 3 sheriff's deputies were standing in my driveway, snow blowing sideways around them, while a woman in a bright red winter coat pointed directly at my truck like she'd just caught a bank robber. By noon, the HOA had fined me $800. By sunset, local news crews were parked outside my ranch. And 6 weeks later, the same HOA president who called me a selfish rule breaker was standing in a county courtroom trying to explain why she'd ordered volunteers to stop helping elderly residents during the worst blizzard our county had seen in 20 years. She never expected me to fight back. She definitely never expected what the county discovered while investigating that ridiculous fine. If she had simply said thank you, none of what happened next would have ever happened. Instead, she picked the wrong neighbor. My name is Jack Turner. I'm 46 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with short dark brown hair that started turning gray around my temples. My wife, Emily, jokes that the gray makes me look wiser than I really am. Maybe she's right. I own 60 acres just outside the small Texas town of Cedar Creek. Most people in our area know my place as Turner Ridge Ranch. It's not some giant cattle empire. Just enough land for a modest herd of black Angus cattle, a red horse barn, a weathered white farmhouse, and the kind of quiet that makes city people uncomfortable. I inherited the property from my grandfather, who bought it after returning from Vietnam. Every fence post, every oak tree, every gravel road carries a memory. About 8 years ago, a developer built an upscale subdivision right next to my western property line. The community called itself Pine Ridge Estates. Large brick homes, perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, an HOA that treated its rulebook like it was the United States Constitution. At first, we got along just fine. Most of the homeowners were decent people who waved when they drove by. Some even bought fresh eggs from us or brought their kids over to see the horses. Then the board changed. The new HOA president was Linda Crawford. Retired corporate manager, perfect blonde hair that somehow never moved in the wind, designer winter coats, expensive sunglasses even on cloudy days, and an attitude that suggested she believed everyone else existed simply to inconvenience her. Linda loved rules. Not because they kept people safe, because they gave her power. Within her first year, she'd fine people for leaving garbage cans out too long. She threatened one family over the color of their Christmas lights. She tried forcing a retired Marine to repaint his front door because the shade of blue wasn't community approved. People complained quietly. Nobody challenged her publicly. The fines kept coming. I stayed out of it. My ranch wasn't part of the HOA. Never had been. Never would be. That fact seemed to bother Linda more than anything else. She couldn't tell me what color to paint my barn. She couldn't complain about my tractor. She couldn't regulate my cattle trailers. And she absolutely hated that. The first time we really argued happened over a fence. She marched onto my property without permission one spring afternoon while I was repairing a section damaged by a storm. "You need to move this fence." I looked up from my post-hole digger. "I was here before your subdivision existed. It doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Our residents don't want to see old ranch fencing. I leaned against my shovel. Good thing they bought houses next to a ranch. She walked away furious. After that, every interaction somehow became more ridiculous. Anonymous complaints about tractor noise. Complaints about cattle smells. Complaints about my work lights during calving season. Each time county officials politely reminded her that my ranch was outside HOA authority. Each time she seemed more determined to find something she could control. Emily kept telling me to ignore it. Eventually she'll find someone else to bother. I hope she was right. She wasn't. The weather forecast started warning about the storm 5 days before it arrived. Meteorologists called it a once-in-a-generation winter system. Heavy snow, ice, 60-mile-per-hour winds, temperatures below zero. Around here, that's enough to shut everything down. The grocery stores emptied within hours. Hardware stores sold every shovel they had. People filled gas cans. Generators disappeared from shelves. I spent 2 straight days getting the ranch ready. Wrapped exposed pipes. Moved extra hay into covered storage. Checked every fence. Filled diesel tanks. Tested my backup generator. When you raise livestock, storms aren't inconvenient. They're dangerous. The first snow started just after midnight. By sunrise, 6 inches already covered everything. By noon, drifts reached nearly 2 feet in places. Power lines started falling. Tree limbs snapped under the weight. Road crews couldn't keep up. The county declared a local emergency before dinner. I stood on my front porch watching snow pile against the barn doors when my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Frank Wilson. Frank wasn't part of the HOA board. He lived at the edge of Pine Ridge Estates with his wife, Martha. Both were in their 70s. "Jack," his voice sounded exhausted. "You got power?" "Barely. Our street's completely blocked. Martha's oxygen machine only has backup batteries." I didn't even hesitate. "I'll be there." Emily already knew what I was thinking. She smiled that smile I've loved for 23 years. "Take the plow." My truck wasn't fancy. An older heavy-duty diesel pickup with nearly 200,000 miles. But the front-mounted snowplow had cleared ranch roads through worse storms than this. Within 15 minutes, I was pushing through drifts toward Pine Ridge Estates. The entrance looked abandoned. Snow nearly buried the decorative stone sign. Several cars sat stuck at odd angles. People stood outside trying to dig with garden shovels. The moment they saw my truck, they started waving. I lowered the blade. Snow rolled away in thick white waves, one driveway, then another, then the main road. Within an hour, trapped families could finally move again. Nobody asked me to do it. Nobody offered money. I didn't want either. Neighbors brought hot coffee. Kids waved from windows. An elderly woman cried after I cleared enough space for an ambulance to reach her husband. That alone made the freezing cold worth it. I kept going. Street after street, driveway after driveway, until darkness swallowed everything except my headlights reflecting off blowing snow. Around 9 that night, I noticed headlights approaching from behind. A black luxury SUV, Linda Crawford. She stepped out wearing spotless white snow boots that somehow hadn't touched the slush. Even in a blizzard, she looked like she'd walked out of a magazine advertisement. She folded her arms. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I shut off the truck. "Helping. You don't have authorization." I stared at her. "I'm clearing snow." "You're operating commercial equipment inside Pine Ridge Estates." I actually smiled because I thought she couldn't possibly be serious. "This isn't commercial. It doesn't matter." She held up her phone like she was documenting a crime scene. "Our bylaws require board approval before any contractor performs services within the community. I'm not a contractor. You're providing a service. For free, that's irrelevant." Behind her, several homeowners had started gathering despite the freezing wind. Frank Wilson stepped forward. "Linda, he's helping us." She ignored him. "You've created liability issues." An elderly woman wrapped in 3 blankets spoke next. "If Jack hadn't come, my husband would have missed dialysis tomorrow." Linda never even looked at her. She kept staring at me. "I am instructing you to stop immediately." The neighborhood fell silent. Snow blew across the road between us. I looked past Linda at dozens of driveways still buried. Parents carrying groceries through waist-deep drifts. An ambulance struggling to turn the corner. A little girl trying to help her grandfather shovel snow that was nearly as tall as she was. Then I looked back at Linda. "I'm not leaving." She smiled. Not kindly, not confidently, the kind of smile someone wears when they think they've already won. "Then don't say I didn't warn you." She climbed back into her SUV, slammed the door, and drove away through the lane I'd just cleared. I watched her taillights disappear into the white storm. Something told me that conversation wasn't over. I had no idea it was only the beginning. Snow kept falling long after Linda's SUV disappeared into the white darkness. I climbed back into my truck, dropped the plow, and finished clearing the rest of Pine Ridge Estates. The work was slow. Every pass through the neighborhood pushed another mountain of snow to the side, but the wind filled half of it back in before I reached the next street. It felt like I was fighting nature itself. Around midnight, I was exhausted. My gloves were soaked. My shoulders ached. The diesel engine had been running for nearly 7 straight hours. Then my phone rang again. It was the county emergency dispatcher. "Mr. Turner, speaking. We've received reports that your truck is the only heavy plow operating on the west side of Cedar Creek. Looks that way. The county road crews are overwhelmed. We can't officially hire private equipment during the emergency without paperwork, but if you're willing to keep helping, we'd appreciate it." I wasn't planning on stopping. We figured as much. Just be careful. That phone call reminded me why I was still out there, not because anyone paid me, because people needed help. For the next 14 hours, I barely stopped. I cleared the church parking lot so it could become an emergency warming center. I opened the road leading to the volunteer fire station. I pulled 6 stranded vehicles out of snowbanks. I even used chains to drag a fallen oak tree off County Road 18 after it blocked an ambulance. At one point, a deputy sheriff rolled down his window and simply said, "Jack, you're saving us hours." That was enough. By the second morning, the storm had finally begun to weaken. The sky was still gray, but the heavy snow had stopped. People slowly emerged from their homes. Children built snowmen. Neighbors shared generators. Someone hung an American flag from a porch that had almost disappeared under the drifts. For a few hours, the whole community felt united. Then Linda showed up again. This time she wasn't alone. She had 2 HOA board members with her. One carried a clipboard. The other held a camera. They walked straight toward my truck while I was scraping packed ice from the plow blade. Linda didn't even say hello. "You've been formally documented." I blinked. "For what?" "Unauthorized commercial snow removal." I looked around. People actually stopped shoveling just to listen. Frank Wilson slowly walked over. Several other homeowners followed. Linda opened a folder. "According to Article 9, Section 14 of Pine Ridge Estates bylaws, any contractor performing work inside the community without board approval is subject to immediate penalties. I'm not a contractor. You've used commercial equipment. My personal truck. With a plow. I own a ranch." She smiled. "So you admit using heavy equipment." I rubbed my forehead. "You really came out here to argue while people are digging themselves out of a blizzard." "This isn't an argument." She handed me an envelope. "This is your notice." I opened it. My stomach tightened. "Oficial violato notice. Fine amount to $800. Due within 10 business days. Failure to pay may result in legal action." I honestly thought it was fake. I read it twice, then a third time. Behind me, someone actually laughed. Another neighbor whispered, "She's serious." Frank stepped beside me. "This is insane." Linda pointed toward him. "Mr. Wilson? Interference with HOA enforcement may also result in penalties." Frank looked at her like she'd completely lost her mind. "I'm 74 years old. I don't care. You should." The crowd grew larger. Nearly 30 homeowners now stood around us. A young mother named Rachel spoke first. "If Jack hadn't cleared our street, my daughter couldn't have reached the hospital." Another man raised his hand. "My wife would have missed chemotherapy." Someone else yelled and never charged anybody. Another voice. "He saved this neighborhood." More people joined in. "You should be thanking him." "This is embarrassing." "Resign." Linda's face turned bright red. She wasn't used to people standing against her. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. The rules apply equally to everyone. I folded the notice and slipped it into my jacket pocket. You done. For now. She looked almost pleased with herself. You have 10 business days. Then she turned around and walked away while half the neighborhood stared in disbelief. One little boy, maybe 8 years old, looked up at his father and asked loudly, "As helping people against the rules?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew what to say. That afternoon, local Facebook groups exploded. Pictures of me plowing snow started appearing everywhere. Someone had recorded the confrontation. Within hours, thousands of people had watched Linda hand me the fine. Comments poured in. Unbelievable. Fire the HOA. This man deserves a medal. Name the neighborhood. The video spread faster than the storm itself. By evening, local television stations started calling. I ignored every interview request. I wasn't interested in becoming internet famous. I wanted to get back to feeding cattle. The ranch had been neglected for nearly 2 days. Broken fences needed repairs. Water troughs had frozen solid. Calves still needed attention. Life on a ranch doesn't pause because social media is angry. The following morning, I found something waiting at the end of my driveway. A white envelope sealed inside a plastic bag. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single typed sentence. Pay Tichi Fenning or Whirl Maki your left Messerelite. Emily read it twice. You think it's Linda? I don't know, but someone wanted us scared. She looked toward the road. We're not paying. I smiled. Not a chance. Around noon, Sheriff Daniel Brooks pulled into the ranch. He climbed out of his patrol truck carrying a travel mug of coffee. I figured you'd still be stubborn. I've been called worse. He laughed. You got a minute. We sat on the porch overlooking the snow-covered pasture. I've gotten 6 calls about you. Only 6. 5 were people thanking you. And the 6th, the OA, I wasn't surprised. They're demanding we enforce their fine. Daniel shook his head before taking another sip of coffee. I had to explain again that HO fines aren't criminal matters. So why come out here? His expression became serious. They also accused you of trespassing. I stared at him. They invited me. I know.
They called me. I know. There are videos.
He sighed. Jack, they're trying to build a case. That caught my attention. A case for what? They're claiming your plow damaged private property. I laughed, until I realized Daniel wasn't laughing. You're serious. I wish I wasn't. I stood up. They're making this up, probably, but they'll need evidence. There isn't any. Daniel nodded slowly. Then don't worry. He climbed back into his truck before stopping. Oh, one more thing. The county judge asked who kept the west side roads open during the storm. I shrugged. I helped where I could. I wanted me to tell you. Daniel smiled. Good work. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe this ridiculous situation was finally ending. I couldn't have been more wrong. 3 days later, I walked out to check my mailbox. My truck was gone. At first, I thought Emily had borrowed it. Then I saw fresh tire tracks leading to the road. My stomach dropped. I called Emily immediately. You take the pickup. What? The truck's gone. Silence. Then, I'm coming outside. We searched the property anyway. Deep down, I already knew. Someone had taken it. An hour later, a towing company finally answered my call. Yeah, we have your truck. What? It was ordered impounded by who? A pause. Then the words that made my blood boil. The Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. They had my truck towed from my own ranch. And that was the moment I realized this had stopped being about an 800 fine. This had become personal. The tow yard manager looked genuinely uncomfortable when I walked into his office. He slid a clipboard across the counter without making eye contact. Mr. Turner, before we go any further, I need you to know we didn't know the full story. I'd like to hear it anyway. He sighed. Your truck was ordered towed as abandoned commercial equipment. I stared at him. That's what the paperwork says. He handed me a copy. The request listed the location as common HOA property adjacent to Pine Ridge Estates. My ranch address had been crossed out by hand. Someone had literally altered the paperwork. Who signed this? The manager pointed to the bottom. Linda Crawford. Underneath it was the signature of 1A board member and the logo of the OA management company. I felt something change inside me. Up until that moment, I thought Linda was just arrogant. Now I realized she was willing to falsify official documents. I paid the towing fee to get my truck released, but before I left, I asked for certified copies of every page. The manager nodded. I'd keep those. I planned to. The next morning, I met with attorney Sarah Mitchell. She didn't say much while reading through the stack of papers. The CHO violation, the threatening letter, photos from the storm, videos residents had sent me, the towing order. When she finally leaned back in her chair, she smiled. Jack, done! Yeah. Did you leave anything out? I don't think so. She folded her hands. Good, why? Because this may be one of the strongest abuse of authority cases I've ever seen. For the first time in weeks, I slept well. 3 days later, Sarah filed suit, not over the 800 fine, over everything. Wrongful towing, fraudulent documentation, trespassing, harassment, defamation, interference with emergency assistance, property damage caused by the tow truck crossing my pasture. The county also received a formal complaint requesting an investigation into whether the OA board had filed false documents during a declared emergency. That was the filing nobody expected, especially Linda. A week later, county surveyors arrived at my ranch. At first, I assumed they were investigating the towing incident. Instead, the lead surveyor introduced himself. We're here because your complaint raised questions about the original subdivision boundary. My complaint. The paperwork references common property. Also, we're verifying whether that common property actually exists. I watched them unload GPS equipment worth more than my truck. For 3 full days they measured, marked, compared deeds dating back almost 40 years. They barely spoke. Then, on Friday afternoon, the lead surveyor knocked on my front door. "You may want to call your attorney." "Why?" He smiled. "We found something." To Monday morning, Sarah arrived carrying a thick folder. "You aren't going to believe this." I laughed. "I've been saying that every day." She spread aerial maps across my dining room table. "The original developer made a surveying mistake almost 9 years ago." "What kind of mistake?" She pointed toward Pine Ridge Estates. "This strip here. It followed the entire western edge of the subdivision. Never legally transferred." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked me straight in the eye. "It still belongs to Turner Ridge Ranch." "How wide?" "Between 26 and 31 feet. I blinked. "That's impossible." "I know." She smiled. "It's recorded." That narrow strip contained the decorative entrance sign, the HOA flower beds, their security cameras, part of the decorative stone wall, several light poles, and nearly half the road Linda used every single day. Silence filled the room. Finally, Emily whispered, "She's been threatening you while standing on your land." Who news traveled fast. The county immediately froze any construction or landscaping along the disputed property until ownership could be confirmed. Linda exploded. She called emergency HOA meetings. She hired another lawyer. She claimed the county was mistaken. Then the title company produced the original deed. Then another, then another. Every single document pointed to the same conclusion. My grandfather had never sold that strip. Nobody noticed because everyone assumed the developer's survey was correct. Until now. The courtroom was packed. Residents filled every bench. Local reporters lined the walls. Even deputies had trouble controlling the crowd. Linda walked in wearing another expensive suit. She looked confident. That confidence lasted about 15 minutes. Sarah began with the towing documents, then security footage, then cell phone videos, then testimony from homeowners. Frank Wilson stood first. "If Jack hadn't cleared my driveway, my wife would have run out of oxygen." Rachel testified next. "My daughter reached the hospital because of him." The dialysis patient, the firefighters, the deputy sheriff. Even county emergency officials testified that my truck had helped keep critical roads open. Then came the tow yard manager. He identified Linda's signature. He admitted the address had been changed before the tow. The courtroom became very quiet. Finally, Sarah called the county surveyor. He rolled out a massive map. "This red line represents the actual property boundary." He pointed toward the subdivision entrance. "The HOA entrance monument," he paused, "is located entirely on Mr. Turner's property." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. "The roadway, partially on Mr. Turner's property. The landscaping, Mr. Turner's property. The security cameras, a Turner's property." Linda's attorney stood. "Objection." The judge looked over his glasses. "On what grounds?" He couldn't answer. The objection was denied. Then something happened I never expected. The county prosecutor stood up. "This wasn't part of my lawsuit. Will have reviewed evidence submitted during discovery." Everyone turned. "The county has determined there is probable cause that official document submitted to obtain the towing authorization contained knowingly false information." Linda's face went completely pale. The prosecutor continued. "Accordingly, the matter has been referred for criminal investigation." You could have heard a pin drop. After a short recess, the judge returned. He looked directly at Linda. "This court has heard overwhelming evidence that Mr. Turner acted solely to protect the lives and property of residents during a declared weather emergency." He turned toward me. "The court further finds that the OA exceeded its authority, wrongfully caused the towing of Mr. Turner's vehicle, engaged in harassment, and attempted to enforce regulations against property outside its jurisdiction." Then came the words nobody in that courtroom will ever forget. "The $800 fine is declared null and void." A small cheer broke out before the judge raised his hand. "And," he looked back at Linda, "the HOA is ordered to reimburse all towing costs, legal fees, lost income, and damages." Sarah squeezed my shoulder. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, until the property dispute is resolved through proper legal conveyance or purchase, the HOA shall immediately cease use of Mr. Turner's land without his written permission." Linda looked like she might faint. 2 outside the courthouse reporters surrounded me. One asked the obvious question. "Mr. Turner, are you going to block access to the subdivision?" I smiled. "No." They looked surprised. "My neighbors didn't do this." I glanced toward Frank, Rachel, Martha, and dozens of families who had stood beside me from the beginning. "They're good people." I paused. "They deserve better leadership." Within 2 weeks, Pine Ridge Estates held a special election. Linda Crawford and every board member who supported her were voted out by an overwhelming margin. The new HOA president's first official action was driving to my ranch. He carried no lawyer, no clipboard, no violation notices, just homemade pecan pie baked by his wife. He apologized on behalf of the neighborhood. Then he asked one question. "Would you consider selling us that entrance strip?" I laughed. "I'll do something better." Instead of demanding a fortune, we reached a fair agreement. The HOA paid market value for the land, covered every surveying expense, and signed a permanent easement guaranteeing emergency access during future disasters. One additional clause, written by Sarah and accepted without argument, required that no resident providing unpaid emergency assistance during officially declared disasters could ever be fined or penalized by the OA. Every board member signed it. The following winter, another blizzard hit Cedar Creek. Before sunrise, I started my truck. As I reached the entrance to Pine Ridge Estates, something caught my eye. The old OA warning sign was gone. In its place stood a new wooden sign. Hand-carved, simple. It read neighbors first. Below it, in smaller letters, "Thank you, Jack Turner." I parked for a moment and smiled. The snow was just beginning to fall. I lowered the plow one more time. Not because anyone asked. Not because anyone paid me. Because that's what neighbors do. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning in court. It's proving that kindness is stronger than power, that integrity outlasts intimidation, and that the wrong neighbor to threaten is often the one willing to help everyone. Even those who tried to stop him.